Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Yesterday was Bill Sienkiewicz's birthday. Bill has always been one of my favorite artists, and it has been such a pleasure to get to know Bill over the last few years through our mutual friend Sal Avenatti and beyond. One of the great delights years ago was walking into San Diego. First creator I see, Bill. John, great to see you. Oh my God. Honestly, tell that to 1980s John, who was enjoying Bill's work on Daredevil and Batman and Elektra, Assassin, and I certainly was paying attention to the shock of when Bill took over the New Mutants. And at first people were like, I don't know if we like this. Those days are long gone, and certainly he was embraced with his very unique style. Got over the years doing so much great work in conceptual art for movies as well, and I'm just glad Bill is out there doing his thing. This was our very first on-the-record conversation. We had previous conversations before, but this was in anticipation of a New Mutants panel that he did at San Diego Comic-Con, and, but it was a great chance to finally sit down and talk to him about some of the classics when it comes to Bill Sienkiewicz, and I'm just always glad to have him back on the show. I'm sure sooner than later we'll have a new talk. But in the meantime, to honor his birthday, I hope you'll enjoy this first conversation with Bill back from 2016 on today's Word Balloon. Hi everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon. This is John Suntress with an important plea for 2023. You probably read the headlines. Word Balloon took a sponsorship hit that was pretty significant, and I'm asking you if you've ever been a fan of Word Balloon and considered making a donation through Patreon, a very meager but important subscription. I hope you'll consider it. It's going to be a challenging 2023, and I need your help. So if you like Word Balloon, if you enjoy the content, I'm not going to slow down and keep bringing you some excellent content, but I could really use your help via Patreon, patreon.com/wordballoon. If you can afford the price of a comic book, if you can even afford $1 a month, it would be greatly appreciated and help the cause to keep Word Balloon going at the level and intensity that I've been doing in the last 4 or 5 years, and bring you a lot more content and a lot of great interviews and interesting things about the pop culture world. Patreon.com/wordballoon. I could really use your help. Thank you for your attention, your time, and listening to Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by AlexRossArt.com. Alex has been a longtime sponsor of Word Balloon. I greatly appreciate it. You got to go to his website. You will find tremendous art from original work, covers, pages, fantastic lithographs, amazing posters. Every price point is covered, and every subject is covered at AlexRossArt.com. You've enjoyed his iconic looks at DC and Marvel, but also great stuff like his wonderful work on the Monkees, Monty Python, so many other great pop culture things that Alex has put his fingerprints on. His wonderful Flash Gordon poster that evokes the fantastic Dino De Laurentiis Sam Jones movie. Recently, Alex did things like the timeless Marvel covers featuring great solo shots of all your favorite Marvel heroes, and of course his Fantastic Four full circle graphic novel still available. All waiting for you now at AlexRossArt.com. Finally, Bill Sienkiewicz. Welcome to Word Balloon. Man, we've been talking about doing this for years, and I'm so glad that we're finally doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's great to be here. I'm really surprised. It's like that it's taken us this long. It's, it's one of those things. It's like, we see each other so often that we sort of assume or presume that we will be able to any time. And it's almost like when you have, it's like living in New York City and not going to the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building until relatives come, it's a special occasion,
I hear
so
you,
I don't
man.
mean that's sound like I'm taking you for granted or anything.
Not at all.
My God, it's like you're the Empire State Building of podcasts.
Oh, you're very sweet, dude. No, hey, well then, you are the Chrysler Building of comic book artists as well. If we can't.
Oh my gosh! Well, that's. Hey, people, Google those things. What he just says means something.
I was such a bumpkin my first trip to New York. me and another radio guy, I went to cover an HBO fight for one of the CBS Sports Talk station in Chicago, and
Right.
we're walking towards a building, and I'm like, I think that's the Empire State Building. I'm not sure. I think it. And this guy walking by goes, Chrysler Building. I'm like, yeah, thanks. Okay, Abbott and Costello make it to New York. The Bumpkins are in New York now. So I was schooled, but it's good. That's a beautiful building. But anyway.
Yes.
You know, but no, this is great. I want to start at the beginning because, geez, what a career. And, tell me, I've read a couple things, and it sounds like you started drawing at a very early age.
Yeah, it's hardly a new line that I've said, but it sort of seems the one that fits descriptively for me is that I knew what I wanted to do at a very young age. It selected me. So I really had no say in the matter. It just was other people who go through their lives saying I don't know what I want to do. I have no idea what that feels like. So, and I suppose I should consider myself incredibly fortunate.
Well, the talent will out. I mean, so who were your early comic book guys that you really were fascinated by as a kid?
Well, the one that the ubiquity of Superman growing up with Kurt Swan was certainly there. And again, not to sort of overuse the analogy of the Empire State Building, but he was sort of like a tried and true kind of. He was always there. It was like this. Like if he didn't exist, we'd have to invent him, kind of a thing for Superman. But the idea of the artist that really sort of struck me in terms of kind of odd artistic decisions and choice making that really was where it felt like it was art. And what I mean by that was that the illustrations that Kurt would do for Superman were amazing, and the storytelling, and they completely involved me as a reader in the story. But then Carmine Infantino's work on the Flash was the thing that sort of really sort of ignited my curiosity more than Kurt did, because he would do these, just simply like the graphic sensibility that he would employ when he would have the Flash racing through Central City, that sort of wisp of a line, that red and that streak across the panel to connote the speed. And also his very distinctive captions with the fingers and the hands sort of gesturing into the panel and out of the panel. That to me, you never saw that in any Superman story. That was something that was absolutely Carmine, and not, it seemed to fit the Flash. So it felt like it became, at a very young age, this sensibility that, even though I might not have known all the artists, certainly with Marvel, they were a little late to the game in terms of giving credit. But even then I started to realize that there were personalities and distinctive styles to the art. So I know it's a rather long-winded answer.
Not at all.
But,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
That was Kurt. That was like the difference between Kurt and Carmine for me. And then of course, when Neil Adams came on board with the covers, that was really incredibly upsetting to me. I actually despise Neil's work, and he knows this, and I think most people, who've heard from me before talk about this, they can relate. And I've actually had people come up to me, passing the torch, so to speak. I hated your work when I first saw it, and then I grew up, and now I kind of tolerate it. It's that kind of, it's that kind of change. I don't know whether that's, maturing or growing, or simply getting older, or, realizing that you can't buck the tide. Like this, this guy's here to stay.
That's awesome, man.
But actually with Neil, so what Neil did was caused me to wholesale bail on DC Comics. I just went, I'm out. It was that reactionary for me. It was like I just got to get away from this. So I guess that probably speaks more to the passion that I felt for the medium, and because it wasn't just another style; it was an affront.
I understand.
So, but that's when I switched over to Marvel, and obviously got really into Kirby. Even though I'd seen some Marvel stuff, some of the collections, the multi-issue sort of compendiums, like sort of the 80-page giant version of Marvel stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when I really kind of got into the FF and Kirby and Thor, the whole minor, Spider-Man, you name it. And I was hooked. And then I slowly, and I realize I'm answering the question you haven't asked, but it's like, you're going back further after Neil's stuff sort of became like the beacon of what I wanted to be by the time I had sort of grasped onto what he was doing and realized just the level of his talent. I was fully immersed in comics as a the full tilt medium and art form.
There's one more DC guy from the Silver Age that I wonder if you had an opinion of back then, because it's different, but there's I see some sort of link to the way Nick Cardy was doing those really interesting...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nick, again, when he was doing... he would do a lot of the covers, which I absolutely loved, but when he was doing the Teen Titans specifically, even being on Batlash and...
Aquaman.
And, some of the... Aquaman. For some reason, I think Aquaman I enjoyed, but for me, he always sort of suffered from the jokes that everybody... sort of still, put to him,
I understand.
So he was a fine supporting character, and I enjoyed it. But in terms of the Teen Titans, when he was doing, I think he also for a couple of issues. I think he inked Gil Kane, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's interesting. You might be right. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I got to know Nick very well, and what an incredibly sweet, talented man. And one of my my great disappointments, I've been very fortunate to be able to ink or do finishes over a lot of my heroes, Carmine Infantino being one of them and Neil being another. Unfortunately, Kurt Swan, I never was able to work over. But I did meet his daughter, who was actually a bartender at the bar and restaurant downstairs from my studio in Westport, which was, I don't think she even remembers me, but she was actually a bartender there. So I was sort of like one degree of separation from Kurt.
Sure. That's awesome, man. That's fantastic. And also,
I would have loved to have been able to work with over Nick on something. And it got to be kind of a painful thing at the end of his, before he passed away, because, not to sort of shift gears dramatically, but when you get artists of Nick's caliber, of Gene Colan's caliber, of Gil Kane's, certainly Jack Kirby, comics are not known for their kindness to their elder statesmen.
Yeah.
And guys like Jim Aparo, barely getting work. I found that incredibly insulting and heartbreaking. And, as a matter of fact, I even went to some of the editors and said, you've got to get Nick on something, because I want to, selfishly, I want to work over him. And also selfishly, I feel like I want to see his work out there.
I understand.
Of course, he didn't make it, but he passed away shortly thereafter. But
wow.
Anyway, I digress.
No, not at all. All good digressions. Absolutely, man. And another name from the past I want to ask you about, is this true after art school, you went to DC Comics and you showed your portfolio to Vinnie Coletta?
Yes, I did. And he was actually, and I got to know Vinny much much better, as much as you can know somebody with as colorful a history as he had. I actually visited him in New Jersey, and he was a really, colorful, I guess is the best way to describe him that I can say in a public forum. But really interesting guy. But he actually was really, really kind, because in those days, I think it was 78, 80, I forget the year it was, that I actually went to New York to sit in DC's waiting room or lobby or whatever. Mm-hmm. There were no, like hoops you had to jump through to get, even get in. You didn't have to leave your driver's license. You didn't have to be, frisked or carded or give up your, your firstborn to be able to get in. I think what finally did it was apparently he came in through the back entrance, which sounds perfectly comic booky when you think about it. All the comic places had these secret entrances that, the editors and artists used. All the stiffs have to come in through the regular channels. But I think the receptionist got tired of me watching her eat. So I think that may have been a factor. She was just munching away on all kinds of stuff. And I just sat there patiently waiting in my, my petroleum-based clothing. I think there was no natural fiber on anything that I was wearing. Total,
polyester
rube from, absolutely. Total rube from the sticks.
So you didn't have
it was an incentive.
You didn't have an interview? You really went in and just kind of showed up?
No, all of my friends, I was in art school, in New York School of Fine and Industrial Art. Mm-hmm. And I was in my second year, and all of my friends were older, and were graduating. So I thought, well, let me just, I love painting and illustration. I was really kind of getting into that world. And again, always loved comics. But I thought, well, maybe let's see if I can try to get a job or at least a critique or a pinup or cover or something. And then if I don't make it, I'll just go back and finish my third year of school and just keep, working in terms of painting and illustration and see what happens. Because I also wanted to do movie posters and maybe even do some gallery work. But so school was finished in May, and then I took 1 month and put together maybe a 12 or 13 page portfolio of all DC characters, obviously all the characters that Neil had done, because by that time he was so firmly implanted in my ideal, artist position. Mm-hmm. And I went in, I just took the train in, which was this old, wicker seated, monstrosity out of New Jersey. The kind of seats that if you, where the wicker dries out and breaks off. So if you happen to be, wearing shorts, you stand up, you look like your thighs are woven out of hemp or something. And and all the windows, because I think every car was a smoking car then. So every, and I probably I didn't smoke then. I didn't smoke cigarettes then. So I was sitting in all the windows were this sort of, mustard color.
Sure, absolutely.
Really absolutely disgusting. I mean, even the flies wouldn't stay in that room.
I hear you, man.
But then when I got that night, when I got the go ahead to actually work through various sort of chess and checker, maneuvers of leapfrogging and strange current, a string of events. The train I took back happened to be, for some reason, I don't know why, but it was a commuter train, which was this quiet, air-conditioned, luxury, everybody's in suits and ties and reading the New York Times. And I'm sitting by the window and watching the sun go down, as I'm going through Morristown on the way back up to Dover. And I'm going, wow, it's like I came in on the wicker and I'm back. It was like this, I had this mental sort of snapshot of, how different things were, it felt like this big sea change, which in many respects it absolutely was for me.
That's awesome. So did he first of all, what made you turn around on Neil Adams' style? Because as you say, it kind of repelled you as a reader. So when did you kind of have it click where it's like, oh no, this guy actually
I think good. when he started to do some of the interiors,
okay.
And I think it was especially, I think it was his work on Batman, on Brave and Bold, sure. And then also he when he was doing some of the, I think he was doing the Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff.
Yep.
And that's really kind of where it triggered out. When he was when the characters were emoting, and really expressing themselves, and he would capture nuances of expression, and I mean. As a reader, I could obviously grasp the intent of any artist to convey an emotion. Everybody from Sal Buscema to Ernie Colon, for Richie Rich,
Absolutely.
So, but when Neil was doing it, it really lit a fire. It was just like I had this epiphany. This, may not have been a big one, maybe been like a smaller, like an epiphanet or something. Just this tiny thing, and it was like, oh wow, okay, this is something, and I can't recall if it all happened in one fell swoop or if it was something that kind of changed over time. But I literally, whatever switch did turn, I went from, hating it to not being able to get enough of it. And, and that was sort of the fire that was lit, under me. And from that point on, all through my teens, I studied Bridgman and Victor Perard, with anatomy, reading my mother's medical books
Cool.
to, study anatomy, which of course didn't really work for anatomy purposes, but it certainly, gave me a lifetime supply of hypochondriacal subject matter. And then just studying anatomy and really sort of studying Neil's work. So, and growing up on a farm in northern Jersey, there were no other kids who were into comics. So there was no adult or no other fan or friend there going, you really should do your own style. It was like, to me, and I've said this before, that Neil's work kind of saved my life. It gave me something to obsess about and to sort of focus on, to try to, get away from a lot of the sort of the teenage angst, but also what was specific to my own life at the time. Growing where I grew up and things that I was exposed to. So, there's other ways you can sort of obsess, but for me that was the thing I put all my focus in.
That's great.
I wanted to be as good as this guy.
That's great. I did an interview with Mike Oeming, and he kind of said the same thing about his beginnings, and that comics really was this escape, and really gave him something to shoot for and everything when he, was kind of in a tough personal position and stuff in his childhood.
Sure.
So,
I think, I think. I'm sorry.
No. You continue, please.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's kind of a standard. That's not as much of an anomaly as one might think. My buddies like Paul Pope. We've got to know each other real well. It's like we have a lot, we're brothers from other mothers,
Sure.
And the idea of a lot of the stuff that drove him were exactly the same things that drove me. And, so it's a very interesting calling. But I do think it has to do with, because I also loved acting and I loved sports. I also loved guitar, but, I think when I was a teenager, I also started to get, even though I lost some weight, started to work out, I was always sort of self-conscious about my appearance and, sort of became a lot more introverted. So I like to observe and stuff. So the idea of going out and playing guitar or playing sports became less appealing, or a little bit more like I was splitting the master, you can only serve one.
Okay.
So art for me was the one that won out. And it actually, in some respects, it certainly served me really well because, as a heavy kid, I used to get picked on and bullied and stuff, but, I happened to befriend this really huge guy whose nickname was Tiny. So you can pretty much,
Sure.
use your visual, it's like that says it all. And it was almost like having a bodyguard, other guys would sort of pick on me and sort of bully me and stuff. And Tiny would sort of swoop in because, he and I got along great. And he also happened to love my comics and artwork that I was drawing.
Wow.
So it was, it was kind of nice to have a big bodyguard. It felt like something out of the comics to actually have him around.
I could see that, absolutely. So did Vinny introduce you to Neil Adams?
He called Neil, and Neil said, send him over. And I think it was Tony Despoto, who happened to be at the offices as well, walked me over to Continuity.
Okay.
So I went from D.C. Vinny said, I love your work. I could give you work, but in 6 weeks you'll be out on the street. This was during that implosion, that big DC implosion, which I've never quite been able to sort of grasp exactly what it was, but it just sort of meant for me and for what he was saying that artists would be out looking for work. They wouldn't have any kind of regular gig.
Yeah, they were pulling back the line, and yeah, I mean it's out there for people who are listening. They can get a more description and everything, but yeah, DC really cut back its titles after going into fantasy and the Shadow and interesting mystery comics and suspense and westerns and everything, and all of a sudden they pulled back in like 78 or 79. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I guess that and all I knew was that. He thought I was good enough, and
that's awesome.
So he sent me over to Neil. So I went from, not knowing Neil at all to getting into DC, being, given a really wonderful sort of referral by Vinny, and then went over to Continuity, and that was quite another, he was like, here I am, I'm meeting my idol, so
yeah.
And so he invited me into like the main room, and I think Alan Weiss was there, and I forget who else, but because I remember Alan Weiss specifically because he made a comment about my Eiffel Tower tie. I think he was, I can still see this. He was incredibly friendly, but I can still see the smirk on his face. I mean, here he's like this total New Yorker talking to Lil Abner, but everybody sort of, sort of swooped in around Neil and around me, and as Neil looked through the portfolio, and and it was kind of magical. It was my experience, but I look at it now in terms of any kind of experience that other people might have, and I realize just it was sort of the Hitchcock thing of clear horizon. It just was like, wow, this is like, not exactly blessed or blessed in a secular manner. It was like, holy, this is just too surreal for words.
That's awesome. It's all laid out for you. Yeah, man. So.
Well, yeah. Then he called up, he looked at one drawing of Superman and he said, I had done, and he said, it's interesting. What defines a style is not what we do right, but our mistakes. And that always stayed with me. He was sort of teaching school, giving a lesson to all the people who are sort of around us.
Cool.
And then he called up Shooter, and he said, "There's a guy here I want you to look at. Only problem is he draws like me." And so I went from there over to Marvel with an entire portfolio of Batman and Green Lantern, Green Arrow, Wonder Woman, all the Penguin, the Joker, you name it. And Shooter said, the costumes don't matter. It's obvious you can do that. But I can give you as much work as you want. You just have to sign a work for hire agreement, which at the time was like, you bet. I'll sign, sign anything. And it's not until much later that you realize that work for hire is sort of
the worst.
Not the open door that you think it is. But it was pretty amazing. Then they offered me this character Moon Knight. I think they offered me Moon Knight because I think they were trying to think on their feet. It was like, let's give this kid something that's like Batman. And Moon Knight was nothing like Batman, but I think they sort of felt like maybe we could do something with it. And I'd never heard of Moon Knight at all. Huh. And it was weird because I was of two minds. I was really feeling incredibly fortunate and like, oh shucks and golly gee, and this is great. And also a little bit miffed. It's like, they want to give me work. That's great. But they want to give me Moon Knight. Why aren't they giving me the Hulk? It was a sense of entitlement and complete, like, gosh, gee, thanks. This is great. So, sort of anomaly and that sort of contradiction, I think, still exists. I'm nothing, I'm great. It's that kind. I think every artist has a version of that. I can do anything. I can't do anything.
I was reading that black and white Hulk magazine where yours and Doug Munch's Moon Knight series was in, and frankly, it did change on you. It reminded me you brought to Moon Knight what I think Marshall Rogers brought to Batman in terms of the flowing cape and that kind of just that an airy sensibility that you believe this guy was swinging around the city in the same way that Batman did, but it just had more of a flourish to it. And I mean, there is a big leap from the previous Moon Knight stories to your work on Moon Knight.
I think that was also, Ralph Macchio and Rick Marshall, who were the editors in the black and white magazine or the full color magazine. I remember we had conversations about that. If we're going to do a character with, I can't do the scallops, the bat scallops, but I certainly could make the cape into a crescent. And so it gave me an opportunity to sort of present Moon Knight in a sort of a bat way. And I think even the Comics Journal got in on it. And I think, Neil, I think I had Moon Knight pushing Batman out of the way, saying, "Out of the way, old timer." And Neil responded the next issue with Batman tripping up Moon Knight, with his batarang.
That's outstanding. And I remember too, the Moon Knight comic. When you were doing it, wasn't it in the specialty store? Wasn't it in the direct market? Was there a direct market? Was that
was the big change was the selling point or the big reason it was actually created was to jump into the direct market. It was like the number one direct sales book.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't know what that meant, because on one hand I was, when I heard direct market, and it was the highest, selling book in that arena, I was also kind of up seeing comics on the newsstand. So when I heard it was going to be on the newsstand, I was, a little bit flummoxed. Like, what is this? What is this direct market of which you speak? So it was quite a little bit of a learning curve.
And was Denny O'Neil? Was he your editor at some point?
He became the editor when it actually became the direct sales book. When they took it out of the black and white or the Hulk behind the back part of the Hulk magazine. Rick Marshall left, and I think they might have closed down the Hulk magazine. And then I think Denny and Ralph became Denny's assistant. So there was a level of continuity with Ralph.
Okay.
And of course, getting to meet Denny in an editorial capacity when I was so enamored of his work growing up.
I bet.
It was amazing. So Ralph and I became really good friends. So in a lot of respects, Denny was more than happy to let Ralph and I talk about how things were going to proceed, because we both had an affection for the character. And then working with Doug, I think
yes, please, yes.
I think I met I think I didn't serve Doug nearly as well as I probably could have. I think I think he was given instructions sort of make the work idiot proof for me, and because I think I really was not used to dealing with like that level of full script, and I realized that it became a little bit more of a challenge for me, because I wanted some room to breathe.
Sure.
And I think that Doug and I sort of had to have some conversations, all good, about giving me less.
I understand.
But,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also, that's...
So he, sort of cutting our, my teeth.
Sure. Well, and further too, because you allude to it. So, had you been working in a Marvel style, and then when the book elevated, or from the start, was it full script, and slowly it led to?
It was full script. I mean, because I was only working with Doug. I think Doug was my quote my writer, and I was quote his artist.
from the start,
all through the whole, from the very get-go.
Got it.
And then I think up until the issue, like the issues in the 20s, when I really started feeling like I wanted to be able to push things a lot more visually. And by that point, the Neil Adams clone moniker had grown really tired and infuriating. I sort of felt invisible. So I took a lot of the drawings that I put in my sketchbook, a lot of the things that I had learned in art school, and a lot of my passion for, collage and abstract expressionism and fashion, and said this, all the stuff that was in my sketchbook that my wife and her friends and, my friends would say, you can't do that in comics, never felt like a particularly valid reason to do something or not do something. So with that, especially with the issue 26 Hit It, which was the plot that I came up with about, let's not have a guy in a cape. Let's just have a guy who's an angry son of a bitch who, the whole point of Hit It for me was that you can take what life gives you and make, lemon meringue pie or beat the shit out of it, everything, and to me that was, it was just simply more of a, telling an emotional story as opposed to, the villain of the month. And that's really when I clicked into the idea of connecting with how images make you feel and how images feel, the sense of emotion, even trying to take what Neil had done by exaggerating the poses. I wanted to even push things further. So if someone was crazy or angry, that, it might get a little sort of swirly-eyed, cartoony, and break that mechanism of like realism, but with a little bit of Francis Bacon thrown in.
Interesting.
And that was in a way that wasn't really actually a conscious thing. I just realized that what I found interesting for me was I wanted to be good enough to be able to draw how things looked, and do the job of illustrating an image to be recognizable, but also to do it in such a way that it felt right. It felt like it wasn't just somebody angry, or it wasn't just a drawing of a pretty woman. It was maybe the pretty woman is going through there's a subtext of a lot of upset. So she's still hopefully attractive, but the method in which I drew her may have been like very, very bold and graphic, and had an undercurrent or an emotional resonance that felt disturbing. It wasn't lyrical. It was more forceful.
Interesting.
And that's what I realized that was kind of the thing that sort of became the through line of everything I do. It's more how things feel and the emotional qualities that sort of connect. Certainly that was the thing that was interesting to me.
I hear you, man. So was your work on New Mutants before your Daredevil work? Because I know, and it's funny because you mentioned it earlier, that you've had fans come up and say, yeah, when I first saw your style, I didn't like it. Because I remember reading in Amazing Heroes the grief you were getting coming in New Mutants, and truly...
Right, that's exactly where I read it, too, yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. And seriously...
I remember calling, some of the writers and just sort of like getting into conversations about them, about their points of view. To the extent that I really felt invisible, or everything I had sort of set my childhood course upon in terms of wanting to, be this, as good as an artist as Neil Adams was, to have that sort of be poo-pooed and slammed and sort of turned into a negative felt very, very. It was a real seismic shift for me emotionally, and it was hard for me to kind of grasp it. But it certainly actually, the anger that I felt and the invisibility that I felt like I was, sort of becoming immersed in, became a real mechanism for change. It really catalyzed my desire to just let go.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah, absolutely, man. No, you trusted your instincts and your talents, And the thing I remember, I think the first thing I saw of yours was the Daredevil graphic novel you did with Frank Miller.
Right.
And
right.
I know it was. I remember the plot. I don't remember the title. And feel free to give me the title.
Oh, that was actually, I think that was Love and War.
Yes.
That was actually done at the same time Elektra Assassin came out. That was it was kind of a salt and pepper shaker, of a set.
Okay.
But that came after the New Mutants.
Okay.
And because the New Mutants with Chris, that was when I really started. I was heavy into Hunter Thompson, heavy into David Lynch.
Cool.
I think the Dune graphic novel sort of was around the same time, and I was also really getting into Tex Avery and a lot of the animation kinds of abstractions.
Interesting.
And I was kind of just cutting loose in terms of everything. It was sort of like even Kurt Schwitters or Robert Rauschenberg as another intersection with art and comics. I felt like comics could do anything, and I was going to be determined to prove it. And they could handle anything. So I mean that was the same reason that they allowed me to do the painted covers. I mean I was really sort of very fortunate that I could play with the painted covers and do illustrative kinds of ideas with say the Dazzler,
sure,
or with the New Mutants.
Well, that's
so by the time I was doing the interior paintings, because it became this sort of stepping stone progression for me. It was like coming in and doing Moon Knight, and then getting more abstract.
Yes. As
Moon Knight progressed, and then they're saying getting sort of feeling I had said everything I wanted to say with that character. Okay, I'm going to jump. I don't want to do any other series. I turned down the X-Men. Chris Claremont came up to me in the hallway and offered me a three-issue Demon Bear story. And when he presented it to me in terms of an opportunity to just kind of do dream logic, dreamscapes, mm-hmm. and sort of just run loose, I was like, I'm in. And Chris and I had so much fun. We said, let's just keep this going. And we did. And then it went from, okay, now I've done all this sort of crazy stuff with the black and white and painted covers. I think the next step is I want to do fully painted interiors, because that's an avenue that hasn't been explored either.
Yeah.
And I felt like there's so much more I want to say on the interior art that is not just, done with pen and ink, but I wanted to, push with collage and with, even on Elektra, there were some panels where she was kind of going to pieces, literally, where I would do a drawing or a painting, cut the piece up with scissors, and then sew the panel back to the to the paper.
Wow!
Even though it wouldn't really show up, but it felt like this is what I have to do.
I love hearing stuff like that. It's like when I've talked to Howard Chaykin about his use of sound effects and how he was sitting there with the Zippo, I forget what it's called. These are artist tools, obviously.
Oh, Zipatone?
Yeah, Zipatone.
Oh, wait, Zipatone, you mean?
Yeah, and just like layering those sound effects on top and stuff, and that you physically would have to paste this stuff in the panel, and that's what it sounds like with what you're describing in it.
Yeah, it was a very kind of labor intensive. It was a very physical act, of immersion. It's with digital stuff, it's a lot. There's a level of clinical, quality. There's kind of it's a little antiseptic in a lot of ways. And I realized that I love getting my hands, dirty. And I think if whenever I pass away off the mortal coil, I mean, they're going to just prop me up in the corner, because I'm probably like 70% polymer at this point anyway.
I bet you and David.
But yeah, I mean, Chaykin was again, when I had my studio in New York City with Dennis Cowan and with Michael Davis,
wow.
Chaykin and Simonson, I think Frank by that point had moved out, but Jim Sherman was in there, who did advertising work. And so having, Howard right next door, Howard and I would have very interesting sort of disagreements or discussions or, competitions about approaches for things. And, I think people really need to know that when he was doing those graphic novels like Stars My Destination, he was a major inspiration for me to do painted stuff.
That's great.
He never did it in in comic books, but he did it in graphic novels. So I just sort of felt like, what he was trying to do, and we had very much a shared love of illustration. Even though I think he still feels that my work lacks structure, but that's our running joke between us.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would love to see your adaptation of Dune. Forgive me, I don't remember it, and I bet it's amazing given your impressionistic style. So, I mean, that seems like a marriage.
I love doing it. I'm very proud of it. I really had a great time. I was very much into David Lynch. I love Dune or Herbert's Dune, and I also love the illustrations that John Schoner had done for the paperbacks. So, yes. So I felt it was an idea that I wanted to run with. The only thing about doing movie adaptations is that they're notoriously thankless in terms of doing them, because like doing the adaptation of Batman and having to have the Joker look like Jack Nicholson, or doing an adaptation of Superman and having to show the wires that hold the actor up. It's like you can do anything in comic. I don't have to do the cast running across the film running across the studio in Mexico. I can actually draw all the Fremen like we need. Of course, they do that all digitally now, but at the time, it became a negotiation between the editor Bob Budiansky and myself and Universal. Whenever I would give Kenneth McMillan, who played Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, I gave him too many pustules, and they said, no, he's only got them on one side of his face, and you're making him too heavy. So I would say, all right, I'll remove 40 of his pustules if you'll allow me to exaggerate his weight by about 400 pounds, because he's big, basically a blimp, the floating fat man. And again, so that's part of what made it fun for me, was I wanted to do not just Dune the movie adaptation, but Dune a visual presentation of it, culling bits from the actual Herbert novel, plus in terms of his descriptions of characters, and also of other art forms that sort of had paid homage to and had sort of inspired and added to the the pantheon of Dune. So I just felt like I was trying to do my version of that. Again, even later when I did Moby Dick, I tried to do kind of a similar tone poem thing.
Wow. To
sort of add something to it and not just illustrate it, but to give it plus that old expression about trying to plus it, plus something,
sure.
Not bring something to it, and not just simply do a boilerplate job.
I understand. I would love to go back and see that. I'm gonna have to find that somewhere. I
think I didn't have any copies of Dune, but I think I went on eBay, and I think a couple of other sort of old bookstores, and it's very strange when you find like older issues of something that are out of print, and finding like work that was maybe $3 or $4 when it came out in mint condition is like $200 or $300. It's very surreal. It's like, look, I just want a copy for my files. I don't
Sure.
care if it's falling apart.
I understand. Are you able to look at your old work, or is it like, oh God, look at all the do you see all the flaws?
Well, I see enough of it sort of at shows when I'm signing.
Sure, of course.
So I kind of am reminded of some pieces, and my disdain for some pieces I've done is sort of like I'm used to it. It's almost like I can't get the same level of worked up when I see something. It's like when I first would see pieces that I didn't like, pieces that I didn't even sign when I did them.
Mm-hmm.
When people bring them for me to sign, I'd be like, oh God, okay, let me just sign it and get this over with. And now it's again, it's that old brick in the wall thing. It's like, okay, these are all bricks, and a couple of the bricks are broken and cracked and discolored. But obviously, if this person thinks enough of this piece to want me to sign it,
oh yeah,
that's totally fine. And I realize, like anything else, I might have a certain feeling about a piece of work, but once it's done and it's out there, it's out of your hands. I mean, it's people are going to respond to it as they will, and it may have nothing to do, absolutely zero to do with the intent behind the piece. It's a little bit like dealing with like what I imagine comedians go through. It's like you can make an observation or a statement, but people think that you meant it. It's as opposed to a just presenting a visual alternative or something that might be an unusual way of looking at something.
I hear you.
They can sort of get did you mean to give the character a penis for a head? It's like, what are you talking about?
I saw no penises in Love and War or Elektra Assassin, and I think I saw Love and War.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's no, I mean, actually, there's that's sort of like almost a running joke. There was a couple of times when I would do sketches, and somebody would say, this looks like this. I have certainly no desire, or there was nothing I brought to the table that would sort of make me want to do anything out of the norm or to insult anybody. So it was like I would literally have to look at the piece and go, I guess I could see how you could see that, but that wasn't what I meant, And that sort of is something that happens when you do a piece of work. Somebody brings their subjectivity to it. And I've learned to sort of acknowledge that.
I hear you, man. What I loved, you mentioned before how you love how certain artists are able to really evoke raw emotion. I really got that in both Love and War and also Elektra Assassin. And first in Love and War, just that torment of the Kingpin. The conceit of the story is Vanessa, his wife, has gotten him to promise, okay, I'll give up crime by midnight. And he's like, all right, I got to get rid of Daredevil before midnight or whatever because I've made this promise to a woman I love. And just the frustration and the one woman that can bring Wilson Fisk to his knees is Vanessa. And I just remember you had a great scene of him just screaming at her, Vanessa, and just big purple face just screaming at him and stuff. And it was awesome. It really was raw emotion. And again, this impressionistic style that, as I understand, it kind of at first turned off some New Mutant fans. I mean, to me, it really was. And I can understand it because you were coming off of Sal Buscema, who's a very Marvel House style, beautifully classic Marvel kind of style, artist and everything. So it was a departure. Mm-hmm. But I think
absolutely.
But for Daredevil, it really was exciting. And, I was already a fan of Frank's. And I truly think that might have been the first thing I saw of yours. And to me, it was just like, wow, this is like, and it's not a proper analogy, but maybe you'll think it is, but like kind of a Leroy Neiman almost a bit of a style, or at least that era and everything. Because, I don't know, my father kind of grew up in that cocktail generation and stuff post-World War II and really had this kind of neat impressionistic art at the house. And he had a restaurant and we had like cityscapes that were kind of in that style. And that's what your stuff kind of reminded me of. And it was so great to see that in comics. And it really felt, along with the fact that the direct market kind of made comics a specialty art store kind of thing versus something we got on the newsstand right next to Dennis the Menace and Richie Rich, taking nothing away from those great things. But you know what I'm saying. It just felt more adult. And it was like, wow, this is cool. And again, I was in early college and everything. And I'm like, hey, this is awesome. This is what I want to read, man. This is great.
Well, I think, thank you for that. And it's interesting because when I would see Frank up at the offices a lot. And, I loved what he was doing on Daredevil, and we really hit it off. And then when he offered, he said, let's do, a Kingpin story for Daredevil. That was actually, that graphic novel, the Love and War graphic novel, is actually going to be several issues of the actual Daredevil comic. Sure. It wasn't until Shooter saw the pages and said, this is not going to happen because it's such a departure. But he was the one who suggested that we do it as a graphic novel because Starlin's Death of Captain Marvel,
yes,
really sort of like set the the meter running in terms of, being off to the races as graphic novels go. And so Frank said, let's do that. And then let's also just do like maybe an 8-issue Elektra series, kind of like as bread and butter while we're working on the big project, which is the graphic novel. So it kind of turned out that they were sort of done simultaneously,
okay,
but and kind of informed each other, but they still feel different. They feel sort of maybe of the same time, but the Elektra series is there are things I did in Elektra that I would not have tried or wouldn't have worked in Love and War. Certainly the Ken Wynn Xerox head kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I felt like maybe because it was sort of viewed as something Frank and I were doing to augment the graphic novel, it felt like there wasn't this great amount of weight put on it to have it be, precious. So it was just an avenue to play and just, kind of go wild. And, and Frank also, he was, he said, I think you just need to cut loose. And so Frank was an absolutely, one of the most amazing collaborators, and inspirations to work with. Everybody I've worked with has been that way, to different degrees and for different reasons. I mean, Chris was, I can't say enough wonderful things about Chris. So, the Mutants would not have been the Mutants without Chris. And, Chris's way of approaching a plot and giving me the level of latitude that I loved, that was really sort of the high point for me. Because after working with Doug, it was like I kept feeling like give me less, because I want to be able to run with it. And I think that's what Chris sort of brought to it for me. I mean, he would give me a plot, of maybe one page would equal one page of comics, and it'd be like, 4 or 5 lines about the tone of the page and, interaction, but there would be no panel descriptions, nothing. It was just, sort of a minimal setup, and then I could tell the story the way I wanted to. Like, sure. Let me know where you want me to start and where we need to get to, and I'll get you there. Don't worry about, describing, the interior of the cab ride.
Sure. Well, it was a much more Marvel style collaboration with Chris.
Right. I guess so. It's like I never really thought of it as a Marvel style. But now that you mention it, it's sort of like, I guess it was. It was, to me, it was just the way I worked with Chris,
Okay. And with Frank, was it, you say that Frank said too, it was time to cut loose. Did he allow you that same kind of freedom?
Oh, good Lord. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we would push each other, like crazy. I mean, there were many times when I was back on the East Coast and Frank was in LA and I would come out to visit, I can still remember, staying with Frank, and we would just be having these meltdown kind of like hysterically funny conversations about, drawings and of Garrett.
Yes.
And just, running with the stuff in such an extreme way that it was just, the sort of absurdity of what we were proposing. It was just so much fun, and it kind of informed everything we did. Like nothing was sacred. So,
the amount
of Frank was usually.
Frank, no, you go ahead. Frank was usually what?
Well, he was usually, as much of a co-conspirator, as I was. And again, I think that, Chris and I did the same thing, with the Mutants. Like we were trying to push things. Cool. But that was like, sort of within the Marvel framework. I think because Elektra and, was for Epic.
Yes,
we sort of didn't have to really kind of play as nicely within the framework of Marvel Comics. We could sort of even go further, which is something I did with like Stray Toasters.
Absolutely.
Afterward. it was, like what can this medium take? How far can you bend it and break it even before it breaks and all that stuff? Sort of the Alan Alda line from that Woody Allen movie, which I'm blanking on right now.
Crimes and Misdemeanors.
If it bends, if it bends, it's funny. If it breaks, whatever. It's like that kind of.
Well,
that's how I view the comics.
I hear you, Matt. I want to, before we leave Elektra Assassin, I'm interested in Ken Wynn because it was Gary Hart, the presidential candidate of 84, that unfortunately ended in scandal. Like, was he in your mind in terms of a model for Ken Wynn? Because it's funny.
No, actually.
Go ahead.
No, actually, he wasn't. I think I started really getting into the politics of things when I started doing Brought to Light later, and the trading cards, like The Friendly Dictators.
Yes, great
up
stuff
until
from the
then, I think I was marginally liberal, even though I'd grown up in a very conservative household. I realized that a lot of the things I innately believed in were much more progressive, in terms of equity and equality.
Absolutely.
But and fairness. And I think when I did Ken Wynn, I think I was just trying to find. There may have been an idea of thinking of this sort of Camelot aspect of Kennedy, the youngest president at the time.
Absolutely.
I think yes. I don't know if he still is, but I do know that I tried to find a suitable model. And I think I just went into like catalogs, and found like male models who were, like in Sears or something.
Sure.
Just sort of these sort of boilerplate, insipid, sort of non-threatening, figures. And then I just Xeroxed the smiling, faces until they completely were distressed and almost unrecognizable. Mm-hmm. And then I cobbled together one or two of them and put the mouth of one on the head of another and made it slightly off center.
Sure.
So it added a little level of creepiness to it. And then I thought that most politicians, have the sort of, like smiling, it's a new day in America, a baby kissing, like vote for me. And then the sort of, this aggression will not stand sort of stern face. And so I really thought that it became a binary, it's either smiling or this face that's not smiling at all, just sort of stern. And from that, it just sort of opened up in terms of how to approach it. And then when I decided, because I was going to use those images for the like advertisements or the political ads in the like the posters that might come up in the series. And then I realized that after doing that, I thought, well, maybe I can just put that head on the figure, and it will save me the trouble of coming up with a model for the character. And also, I think it feels more like a politician.
Absolutely.
Like this guy's just a mask. So once I did the figure and I decided I wasn't going to do the head, and I dropped that Xerox head in there, it was like, boom, this is it. It was just like, okay, I think I found the solution. And it ended up, again, saying way more than if I had actually gone out and hired an actual model.
That's awesome, man. No, it definitely came through, and it played well with the satire of, kind of manufactured political candidate like that. No, it was great. John Garrett, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent in Elektra Assassin, was it always your guys' intent to have a different S.H.I.E.L.D. agent as opposed to maybe Nick Fury being a character?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we wanted somebody who would end up as Elektra's, bitch, and it's sort of like his punching bag. Which he totally became.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to die at the end of. I think he was going to be kind of a placeholder. Maybe Nick was going to come in later, but I think he was slated to die at the end of the second issue. And I think, again, when Frank and I would do it, we just had so much fun with it. It was like, let's just go with it. And then bringing Perry, the ultimate asshole, in terms of a character, and having him come back at the end of the series, it just dovetailed all just so perfectly. It was a really kind of amazing experience.
Honestly, man, you guys were. It was so great because people immediately think of '86 and they think of Watchmen, they think of Dark Knight, they think of Mouse, and it's like, yeah, don't forget Elektra Assassin, because that really was right there in the part of the zeitgeist of what was going on, and really stretching comics in places that they hadn't gone before. Yeah.
Well, that was a really fertile year for the medium. I mean, I even remember talking about it with Alan and Frank and Chris and everybody. It was like, this is a really special time. We sort of felt the potential and the possibility of the medium, and I'm incredibly proud of Elektra Assassin and also of Love and War, but at the same time, it's like I'm aware that maybe in any other year it might have been like the top one, but there was so much that came out in '86. It's like the fact that it's like, oh yeah, don't forget about this one.
Yeah.
It's that year. It's sort of like '68. 1968
yes.
In terms of the it had a similar kind of zeitgeist kick.
No question, man. No, that's the thing, and we talked about this before we started recording. You really have experienced two really big, or at least are part of the comic scene when these two big really sea changes are happening. Back in the mid '80s, when all that was going on, that led to a couple more things that I wanted to ask you about before we wrap up, especially your work with Alan Moore, but then also to see what's going on today and create our own stuff. And I would imagine your guys' success with Epic, with Marvel, kind of made you guys think, all right, and that was the time when people were kind of experimenting with creator-owned, and we had the black and white explosion where everyone could really try and put out a book, and some people, a lot of people actually had decent success again because of the direct market. So,
right.
Can you compare those two eras of then and today?
Well, I know that when I would talk to Dave Sim about doing creator-owned stuff,
mm-hmm.
He was like constantly talking to me about it, and I was really intrigued by it. But at the same time, I sort of felt like I was having so much fun, sort of enjoying and playing with all the toys
sure.
from the companies. So finally, when I dove in with toasters, that was like. I loved that idea. Although it took so much out of me to tell that story. I mean, it was just like I lived, breathed, ate. That's why I started living in my studio.
Wow.
It really was like I didn't skate along the surface. Let's put it that way. And I think that working on some of my own creator-owned stuff, I've got sort of things percolating. Of my own, but
Great. The
one thing, working with Kelly Sue DeConnick, hopefully she'll still talk to me, because it's like I've been so behind and sort of like trying to like get to this project, because this like I'm bringing to it the same kind of questions and the ability to sort of run with it and open things up, and like how do you push this. This story, because it's such an amazing story that she's written. It's like wanting to bring another level to it. So I look at creator-owned work as kind of a wonderful place to push and really be unique and be a very much a singular voice. And that's something I find is really more and more on display with the wealth of personal creator-owned work. It feels less manufactured, and I think especially like when you're dealing with with say the big two, with the Marvels and the DCs, and the spate of all the superhero movies. I think in some respects, film has sort of supplanted what comics were, especially with the advent of and the expertise and ability that you can work with digital. Back in the day, you had a Jack Kirby double-page spread of Asgard versus the, like ogres or whatever.
Sure.
And he would draw the entire group. I mean, now, that was cost prohibitive, in the past, but now with digital, you can pretty much envision anything. And, so I think comics, have sort of become, supplanted by the digital capabilities of film. And maybe in some respects, the superheroes are sort of, viewed, superhero movies are sort of viewed with a little bit of the same kind of cultural, not contempt exactly, but sort of tolerance that comics were, once had. And I think that comics are becoming more of an author and an auteur arena, and also a place for much more of a personal vision. Because you still, comics, you still can create something, one person or two people or a handful of people. You don't need to run it by committee, and so it's a really interesting time, more than it was even then, because I think the respect of the medium has grown, and that's not just because they, you can take a comic book and have it made into a long form TV series or a film. The cross pollination is pretty pervasive now. Like all mediums are sort of part and parcel of each other.
Yes.
But so the idea of doing something creator owned, it doesn't have the same kind of sort of separateness or sense of it being an anomaly as it used to. At that point, it was almost like, you look at Wendy Peeney's, ElfQuest, which
yes.
is sort of, it became like creator owned, and like, and that usually had was a huge Klieg light that it was like not Marvel, not DC, it was like, now, creator owned is just simply like that, it's that person's own unique vision. It's more of a positive as opposed to it's not this, it's this. It's it's their own vision for and their own story, and there's no level of dismissive response to it like there might have been. It's sort of like telling people that no, creator-owned comics are they're like broccoli. You'll like it. Really, you will.
No, you're right, and it's
almost like I think people are responding to it as a breath of fresh air, or dessert. It's like, it's apple pie. Like I love this. It's like more people are preferring to see creator-owned work.
Absolutely.
Because that's where the most interesting work is being done.
Yeah, and they're bringing
it's not like they're trying to, modulate or to change a license or a property, about, how's this going to affect our ride, or our theme park?
Right.
Like, we're about just doing a really freaking great story.
Well, yeah.
With some interesting characters.
Well, that's the thing, and I think when DC and Marvel try to emulate what's happening in the creator-owned arena, they can't. Because of it's like, let Batman be Batman, let Superman be Superman. People will get the fix they're looking for from these creator-owned books. They're not looking for that in Batman and Superman and the Marvel characters. I said that in not a mean way, but they're like the fast food of comics, where it's like, no, sometimes you want a Whopper, so you're going to go to Burger King. You're not going for a steak meal at Burger King. And they can offer steak, but it's like, it's like I came to watch Superman crash through the wall, untie Lois, have the bullets bounce off of his chest from the gangsters, and clunk their heads and send them off to. It's like, or rescue the girl from the train tracks. It's like, it's variations on the same theme. Whereas, again, in the creator-owned thing, it's its own thing, and it's like, that's great. And they're both great.
It's like I almost feel like the terminology is even going to change even more. Like the idea of creator-owned comics, I think is going to be just simply comics as opposed to product.
Yes,
because the companies are not looking at Marvel and DC is sort of like maybe the two biggest purveyors of it. That's licensing. I mean, the comics are research and development. The comics might just as well be a Happy Meal or a Slurpee cup.
Yes.
They're not comics. And the publishers, the Warner's and Marvel are not necessarily publishers. I think those are simply kind of almost the publishing aspect is they're like lost leaders. I mean, it's sort of like, whereas the real true comics about what the medium is, I don't think that the companies, those big companies, I don't think they actually quote, give one shit about comics. And I'm not saying that sounds a lot more aggressive and angry than maybe it is. But because they're not in the business of, comics, that they're in the business of licensing and product and selling, and other things. So for me, the idea of, comics, and creator-owned comics, those two terms feel like they're much more, honest about what the potential of the true medium of what comics as an art form can be and what it can accomplish. And that's something I've always felt. So, the days of doing something innovative, at Marvel and DC, I don't know if those are the arenas for it.
I understand what you're saying. I completely agree. Back to your style and the choice to go to painting for the interiors. Did it take longer to approach art that way, or because you kind of had the ideas? Tell us. Yeah.
I mean, it did, but at the same time, being young and like incredibly focused on wanting to do that, there was no painted page rate when I told them I wanted to paint the interiors of Elektra, Assassin, or the graphic novel, the Love and War. I'm trying to remember if there was a separate special rate for the graphic novel, so maybe I got a little bit more. But for the comic, even though it was done for Epic, it was technically a comic book, and I think there was only a $40 page rate which was sort of a standard comic book coloring. The Y2BK3 or whatever. The sort of laying out the sort of with Dr. Martin's guides and sort of giving the color guides.
Interesting.
That was the only rate that they had. So I ended up saying, I'll take it.
Wow.
I didn't even sort of fight for it. I just said, that's fine.
Wow.
Because I just needed to do it. I needed to, not wake up one morning and go, I really wish I'd done, painting. It's like, it was like, I just had to dive in. There was really just no choice in the matter.
Wow.
And I was going to do it no matter what the prohibition or even what the income possibilities were. So it may have taken, a little bit longer, but, than the inking, but in other ways it kind of went fast. I mean, there were points when I was doing like 3 pages of painted stuff a day, partly because I was cutting and pasting and doing some, maybe collage, but I did get pretty fast at it. And, plus I don't think I quote had a life, because that became my life, just diving into it. So
no, and I understand from an art standpoint that compulsion that you have to do it. There's no choice. So I get that.
Right.
Right. I loved your. Yeah. It was only 6 issues that you were on the book. I loved your collaboration with Andrew Helfer on The Shadow. It really was. I really grew up on the radio show, and then loved when they reprinted the Gibson books with the Steranko covers.
Oh, yeah.
So I was really such a Shadow, and loved Howard's miniseries. I was not so much of a purist that I didn't appreciate what Howard did. And then you come with your impressionistic style, which really fit the Shadow. I mean, it really added to the surrealism and the invisibility and him appearing out of nowhere. It just had that right vibe.
Well, thanks. It's like, I don't have as quite a beneficent sort of response to my time on The Shadow as you so kindly have. I sort of look at it as like a gig that I ended up doing as a chance to do inking, because
interesting.
Because when it was after I had done Elektra, and DC really, came to me and they said, we really want you to do the Shadow. And they told me it was going to be following what Chaykin had done.
Mm-hmm.
And although, I enjoyed what Howard had done, I was kind of like, I wanted to sort of not run with what Howard had done. I wanted to do my take on the original, so I was trying to do a little bit of a nod to what Howard had done with some of the characters, but also to really kind of throw back to that era of that pulp.
Yeah.
Subvert that as opposed to trying to run with what Howard had done and subvert that as well. Because I do think that there's a part of me that likes to mess with expectations. Like if people, they don't know what they know when they like what they should expect from me is they don't know what to expect. That's kind of how I like to run with it. But after I signed the contract, they said, "Oh, by the way, no painted stuff." It's like we don't want to see what you did with Elektra. So they had sort of slammed the door on how I wanted to approach it, and I sort of felt like like I was sort of sold the bill of goods that I was brought on board to sort of just be a set of hands. So I ended up turning that whole experience into kind of an exercise in inking and sort of trying different like pen styles and layouts and abstractions and like cartooning and caricature. But in terms of what I had tried to do with Straight Toasters or with Elektra or with Love and War, there was none of that. It was simply a gig that I did for 6 issues.
I hear you, man.
I mean, I'm proud of it, and I thought I did some okay stuff on it, but it wasn't where I felt. That was the first time I think I'd felt that it was not a step up. It was kind of a lateral and a semi, one step back.
I understand.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, tell me about your Alan Moore collaborations, if I might hear.
Well, that was sort of like setting the bar incredibly high. I mean, working with him on Brought to Light was wonderful because the political awareness that I developed and again pushing with the exaggerations and caricatures of all these really corrupt and disgusting political arenas. I mean, it's a perfect doing artwork in a political arena. Editorially, or op-ed kind of thing. It's the fact that most editorial cartoonists or political cartoonists are the most brutal, and I just love that so much. It's like they're speaking incredible truth to power.
Yes. And
again, to me, that the fact that that's possible, and then the idea that comics could do that, that was like a 1-2 punch. So when we decided that we would sort of keep our collaboration going with big numbers, after Frank and I had worked with, on Elektra and Love and War, I think, it was almost like the four of us, Dave, Gibbons, Alan, Frank, and myself, sort of like do-si-doed and switch partners. And I think I really set up a really big expectation of what I wanted to do with the series. Artistically and in terms of magnitude and just workload. So it didn't work out partly because the immensity of the project, dealing with 45 different models. I've done actually a video interview that's I think maybe coming out, and they're ostensibly going to be making a documentary about what happened to big numbers.
Oh, that's great.
At some point. Yeah. So we'll see. It's like, the people who actually interviewed me, it's like, I haven't spoken to them in a while, but the short, version is that kind of what big numbers became, why it went off the rails is, the story was about chaos and about how, but the butterfly, the beating of the wings in Africa can sort of destroy the Midwest or something of the United States in terms of the Dust Bowl. So that small changes at the early part can cause huge sea changes later on. Kind of where you go from the inflection point where something just sort of switches to one step forward, two steps back to something of an absolute incredible magnitude of destruction or positive, one extreme or another. And I realized that the chaos that we were writing about or creating in terms of the story, all of those elements, real life, breaking up with, spouses, death of people, not enough hours in a day, all of those things, the chaos of life became what ultimately did big numbers in. There was nothing glamorous about it. It was simply the boring, there were so many different stories that I'd heard about, behind, quote, truth behind the scenes about, substance abuse and, sort of like, incredible sort of, eyes wide shut parties and stuff, or something to do with what caused big numbers to go sideways.
Yes, I remember those stories.
And
Absolutely.
It was nothing like that. It was just simply, it's just chaos. It was chaos.
Wow.
So I suppose in a weird kind of a way, even though I would love to be able to finish it, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But at the same time, I sort of feel that the story of big numbers is actually, the story in some respects of its not happening, of its quote failure.
Yeah, man. No, that was like your let it be. I understand. It's like you guys are such amazing talents. And, you managed to get 2 issues out and you didn't finish. 1963, his work with Rick Veitch. I remember that series as well.
Right.
And that, we never got the final, issue of that. So, yeah, there's just some of these lost projects and stuff. Are you guys at all, like, are you not speaking? And forgive me for getting personal, but I'll ask the question anyway.
No, we haven't spoken. We haven't spoken in a while. I mean, like a friend of mine who interviewed Alan, mentioned Alan. Alan, and we haven't actually spoken face to face or on the phone or anything. But we
correspond,
passed messages back and forth to each other. I think
Good.
Alan says he's sort of away from the whole kind of comics community right now. I think he's doing stuff with Melinda and his own writing and stuff. But I think that Alan, everything is, it's fine. We don't have much, to do with each other, but he doesn't have much to do with people in comics much anymore anyway.
No, I hear you, man. Well, I'm really looking forward. We've talked beyond our promised hour, and I don't want to keep you because I'm sure you got stuff to do. Unless you do want to keep going, it's up to you.
No, I'd love to, but unfortunately, I'm
totally understand.
Quote cleaning my studio because I'll be speaking of Frank Miller. I'll be seeing him tomorrow. So
that's awesome. No, that's great. Yeah. And really, man, for the purposes of the podcast, we'll remind everyone again that Bill and I will continue the conversation in San Diego and welcome audience questions, not just about the New Mutants, and that's the focus of our panel, but we're happy to talk more and answer any questions that people may have. And you do have to come back, though, beyond the panel, because I am really interested in what you've been doing the last few years and some of the inking collaborations you've done. I will ask real fast, because they announced Punisher End of Days. Are you part of the team for Punisher End of Days? I know you were. That's something I'm supposed to be doing.
I think I've got pretty much the entirety of the art chores on that one. So
wow.
It's going to be I don't think Klaus is able to be a part of that. So there is some discussion about it, but we haven't sort of nailed anything down yet.
Okay,
so
and that's
my copious spare time.
I understand. I understand, but yeah, really, Bendis and I have been talking about it a lot, and I'm glad to hear that you're still part of the team and really enjoyed and the Daredevil End of Days, and really also your work on Ultimate Team Up with Brian when you were able to do.
That was a lot of fun. I love working with Brian.
Yeah, man. Yeah. No, and that's the thing, and I'm really glad you and David too, because you guys have obviously a simpatico sensibility as far as art goes. And collage and how Absolutely. You guys approach it.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
Well, Bill, we as we're recording this, we'll continue the conversation next Wednesday at Comic-Con. It's Thursday, 2:30, and I believe it's room 24 ABC. That's where we'll be, and it's a New Mutants retrospective with Bill Sienkiewicz, and I am honored to be the moderator for that. I will be getting out of the way and asking questions and let Bill spin. and then tell tell his great stories about working with the New Mutants. But truly, man, a pleasure talking to you today.
Same here.
And yeah, man, we'll continue next week. And like I said, you got to come back in a few months or whatever, and we'll talk more about your career and what you got brewing.
Absolutely, we'll do. And look forward to seeing you and everybody else in San Diego.
See, what a jerk am I, you know? Man, the guy's trying to clean up his apartment and or studio, get ready for a shoot on a documentary about Frank Miller. And good news is I saw him tweet about it and tweet a nice picture of him and the filmmaker, and he was very pleased with the interview, so I'm glad to see that. But we are going to continue the conversation, as I said, with Bill, Thursday at Comic-Con, 2:30 in the afternoon. It's room 24 ABC. There you go, from 2016, my first conversation with Bill Sienkiewicz. Hey, really fun Word Balloon Live tonight with the host of the Hall of Justice podcast, Seth Everett. We've almost had parallel careers when you think about it. Seth and I started in sports radio before we were podcasting, and we're doing some online things for our respective companies. And then just as a lark, we started covering the nerd culture. And this is going to be fun, talking to Seth about, the Guardians opening and other nerd news of the day. I'm sure we'll discuss where DC and Marvel are as far as movie and television outlets, as the landscape of television and film changes under our feet. Check it out. It's going to be great. It's tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. That's Thursday night. So if you're listening to this after the fact, it'll be posted on YouTube and, of course, coming to Word Balloon's audio channel as well the next day. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Seth Everett talking to me, and we'll be discussing the nerd culture with you if you've got time tonight on tonight's Word Balloon. So make sure you join us then. Thanks a lot for listening. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions. Copyright 2023. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.